Graphene is the ultra-thin form of carbon discovered at the University of Manchester in 2004. It's often dubbed the wonder material on account of its incredible properties that promise great applications from flexible electronics through to optics. I've come along to the lab here in Manchester to learn more about this incredible material.
So what we do is we take some graphite and we place it on some tape, sticky tape.
Just standard.
Yeah, you can use standard
tape.
Scotch tape if you want.
Yeah.
But we have a tape here which doesn't have as much residue for our purposes as Scotch tape. So then you just press the graphite like this.
It's quite squidgy, isn't it?
Yeah. Press the graphite on the tape. And then you can take an impression like this. So when you press the tape together, you're basically removing a few layers.
Okay,
so if you look there,
so it's tearing it off. And
yeah. So we
seems to be quite. It's different in different places, isn't it? It's not an even layer.
No, it comes off in terraces.
Yeah.
So we just remove the excess graphite like this, and at the moment it's quite thick, right? This is still graphite. You can still see it with the naked eye.
Yeah.
What we have to do is then make it a little bit thinner. So we would then press again.
So just repeat exactly the same.
Exactly, and cleave like this. And so each time you do that, you're making the graphite pieces thinner and thinner and thinner. So we just do it a couple more times until we get a nice coverage. What we then do is we have a piece of silicon.
Okay.
So we just put the tape on the silicon like this. Give it a nice firm press. And what's important is you need the silicon to be really clean. So if silicon's not clean, the graphene won't stick.
So how would you do that? How would you ensure it was clean?
We clean it in solvents, acetone, IPA, and then as soon as we have it nice and clean, we then press the graphite onto it. So it doesn't have a chance for any sort of hydrocarbons or water to get on the surface.
Is that why we're wearing all this gear as well?
Yeah, exactly.
Keep the dirt out.
Yeah, because your fingers are quite oily. So once we press the flakes onto the surface, we then just grab the edge of the tape, and the trick is to actually remove the tape quite slowly. And that's a nice. So if you do it too quickly, then
what would happen?
You don't the layers don't cleave that well, right? And so
by cleaving, you mean just
separating?
Separating.
Yeah,
the planes,
exactly. Yeah, separating the planes. So when you separate the planes nice and slowly, you get a higher chance of leaving some graphene on the surface.
Okay.
So you just slowly remove the tape like that.
Okay, I see.
And you can't really see it with the naked eye, just like that. So what we would then do is then transfer the sample to a microscope, where we can have a closer look and inspect the surface.
So Branson's hopefully stripped a bit of graphene from the graphite. So I'm now here with Aravind and his microscope to see if that's true.
Hi. So one of the nice things about graphene is that even though it's a two-dimensional material, it's the thinnest material in the world, you don't need an electron microscope or something like that to see it. You can actually see it in the optical microscope. The trick is that you have to select the correct type of substrate, the correct wavelength of light. If you match the substrate with the wavelength of light, so in this case we use 300 nanometers of silicon dioxide on top of silicon surface. If you use a substrate like that, which is what Branson put the tape down on, and it'll give you the correct contrast that you need to actually be able to see graphene, even though it's such a thin material.
So what's causing these speckly coloured bits here on the blue?
Oh yeah, so when the flakes get fairly thin, there's always some air or solvent or something like that which is trapped underneath the flakes, and it causes bubbles because it's it's like a very thin fabric. So if it's on the surface, there might be something trapped underneath.
So is that unavoidable? Do you always have?
Yeah, usually we do end up having a few of those on the sample. So it's just bubbles on the which are trapped underneath. But as you start going to thinner and thinner layers, you see that it starts turning different shades of blue. But what we actually need to find are the very, very, very thin sheets. And when it becomes less than 10 layers, you go from blue to shades of purple. The purple sort of yellowish purple you see in the background, that's the substrate.
Okay.
And the light purple bits or the dark purple bits you see here are all less than 10 layers. So you can see that there are some bits here which are very, very light purple.
That's the thinnest.
That's the thinnest. So actually with a bit of practice you can just look at the screen and say, right, that's a single layer, that's a double layer.
So obviously there's been a lot of talk over the last few years about graphene, and it's been dubbed the wonder material because it's, it's so great. What is so special about it?
Well, it's not just one thing. The nice thing about graphene is that it's got a whole range of properties which are all really great, and all of them are occurring in the same material. So despite the fact that it's so thin, the thinnest material you can technically make, it's also the strongest material, as in if you try to rip it apart, it takes more force than anything else to rip it apart. But it's also, since it's so thin, it's very light. It's mostly transparent. It's about 97% transparent to light. But another way of looking at it is, despite being that thin, it still absorbs 3%. So depending on what your application is, you can look at it one way or the other. It also has the fastest electron and hole mobility. So electrons and holes can move through graphene faster than any other material. In fact, the electrons in graphene behave as if they are particles of light. So they don't get scattered. If your electrons are moving through any other material, then the atoms and things in the material itself will scatter the electrons around, and it's not very conducting for that reason. But graphene is the best conductor of electricity and heat because these electrons can zip through the graphene as if they are particles of light, so they're not affected by anything else.
Wow.
And so it's got all of these amazing properties sort of rolled into one material.
So you mentioned the mechanics and the electronics and the optics. I mean, what kind of applications are being developed, or at least what kind of ideas are being put forward for applications?
Well, the nice thing about graphene is in about, 6 years, or 7 years since it's been around, people have already started making prototype devices and applications in various fields. For example, there's a lot of interest because it's flexible, transparent, conducting. You can actually think of making displays with graphene to replace indium tin oxide. The advantage being that it's a flexible material. So you can actually think of making flexible touchscreens or flexible electronics with graphene. IBM is very interested in using graphene for sort of the next generation of computer chips. So they're working on graphene transistors for computer applications.
So could they be faster and superior to silicon?
Yeah, they've demonstrated graphene transistors running at 100 to 150 gigahertz or something like that. And there are other advantages as well in terms of power consumption and heat generation and things like that as well.
I mean, do you think these applications, are they way off, decades off, or are we getting closer now?
We're getting closer, but I wouldn't expect something to pop up in the market within the next 2 or 3 years. I would think more like 5 years onward. Things like flexible displays might be in the market in 5 years. Electronics, like computer chips made of graphene, probably 10 to 20 years, 20 years more likely.
Great. Oh, thank you.
Thanks.